Good evening, and welcome to the National Building Museum. My name is Chase Rind, and I'm the Executive Director here at the museum, and I'm delighted that all of you could join us for this evening's program. Tonight's lecture follows a design competition between students of the area's 4 schools of architecture: the Catholic University of America, Howard University, the University of Maryland, and Virginia Tech's Washington Alexandria Architecture Center. During an all-day charrette held here yesterday, teams developed landscape concepts for a pavilion of nations, a place for the exchange of cultural ideals. Just a short while ago, a distinguished jury, led by tonight's speaker, presented awards for the best schemes. The students' work is on display right here in the center court, and I hope that you can take a moment to view their work following the lecture. The competition, as well as tonight's program, are part of Architecture Week, presented by the DC chapter of the American Institute of Architects. Continuing through the end of September, Architecture Week is a collaboration of many embassies, cultural organizations, and AIA DC to celebrate architecture in the nation's capital. The museum is once again proud to participate in this citywide celebration. And to learn more about other Architecture Week events, please visit the AIA DC website. I do want to mention one other program that you may be interested in attending. Tomorrow night, the museum recognizes Engineers Without Borders USA with our Henry C. Turner Prize. There are a few complimentary tickets available, and if you would like to join us, our Vice President of Education, Scott Kratz, will be able to assist you. And Scott is right here. So please let him know if you'd like to come tomorrow evening. Our program tonight is also part of the museum's Spotlight on Design lecture series. This series is sponsored by Lafarge, the world leader in building materials, with additional support from the American Institute of Architects. And we are, of course, very grateful for the support of both. To say a few words on behalf of the AIA, please welcome Mary Fitch, Executive Director of the Washington chapter of the AIA. Mary?
And thanks so much, and on behalf of the American Institute of Architects and the DC chapter, I welcome you to Day 10 of Architecture Week. By a quirk in the usual laws of physics, Architecture Week is actually 20 days long, and the week is a collaboration between us and many other organizations. There remain about a dozen additional events through September 30th, and we invite you to attend and enjoy. Just log on to our website to find out more. The purpose of Architecture Week is to give the public a chance to learn about architecture and design and the value of an architect. I know our national component shares that same goal, and that's why they strongly support the museum's Spotlight on Design series. I'm very much looking forward to hearing our speaker tonight, and I want to thank him and the National Building Museum and all of you for your support of Architecture Week. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary. And now to introduce tonight's speaker, I am delighted to present Nancy Somerville, who's a very good friend of the museum. Nancy Somerville is the Executive Vice President and CEO of the American Society of Landscape Architects. Since joining the society in August 2000, she has expanded ASLA's public relations programs, increased ASLA's presence on Capitol Hill, and enabled the society to become a more effective advocate on sustainability, community planning, transportation, and land use issues. Nancy directs the Society's ongoing green roof education and advocacy programs, as well as ASLA's participation as a partner in the Sustainable Sites Initiative. In 2004, Nancy was elected to membership in Lambda Alpha International, the honorary land economics fraternity, in recognition of her longtime advocacy for the design professions. She received the Civic Award of Excellence from Green Roofs for Healthy Cities in 2008, and is an honorary member of the American Institute of Architects and ASLA. A native of Washington, D.C., she holds a BA from Princeton and an MA from Stanford. We are really proud of our relationship with ASLA. They are industry partners of the museum and sit on our industry council for the built environment. And most recently, we were delighted to host the bookstore at ASLA's convention earlier this month here in Washington, D.C. So Nancy, I thank you and the ASLA for your critical support over the years and look forward to our continued partnership.
Good evening and welcome. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Warren T. Byrd, Jr., FASLA, Principal of Nelson Byrd Woltz Landscape Architects. Just last week, ASLA conferred 3 national awards on his firm during our annual meeting. It's great to see him again so soon, especially since keeping up with Warren can be a bit of a challenge. As a founding principal, Warren has led his firm in a wide range of public and private landscape projects throughout the United States, as well as Canada, New Zealand, the Netherlands, Brazil, Baja, Mexico, Antigua, Russia, and China. Recent and current work, and I'm going to need a big breath for this, includes the Flight 93 Memorial in Shanksville, Pennsylvania with Paul Murdoch Architects of Los Angeles, a 2-block urban sculpture garden on the Gateway Mall in St. Louis, the Dell Stormwater Park at the University of Virginia, the Asia Trail at the National Zoo in Washington, D.C., master landscape plans for Caltech in Pasadena, California, St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, and the University of Miami in Coral Gables, the landscape master plan for Watercolor's 500-acre community on the Gulf Coast of Florida, the city of Lynchburg's urban waterfront park on the James River, and several residential projects in Virginia, North Carolina, and New York. In total, his firm has garnered more than 55 national and regional design awards just within the past 10 years. In addition to his 30-plus years of practice, Warren taught for 26 years at the University of Virginia, serving as chair of the Department of Landscape Architecture for 7 years. His many honors have included an All-University Teaching Award, a teaching award from CELA, the Council of Educators in Landscape Architecture, and 2 Bradford Williams Medals for articles published in Landscape Architecture magazine. Now a professor emeritus, Warren's particular focus in both his teaching and his practice has been on the understanding and adaptation of natural systems and plant communities as they best influence sustainable strategies of design. Ladies and gentlemen, Warren Byrd.
Okay, am I mic'd up in a Britney sort of way? I feel like I should be introducing somebody. Just keep it going. I'd like to start at this side and move to this side. See how we do. While Lafarge is up here and acknowledging sponsors, I want to thank both the Metropolitan AIA chapters, the ASLA chapters, and certainly the Building Museum for sponsoring this. It is, as I'm sure you always hear from speakers who come here, a terrific honor to be able to talk to you within this unbelievable space. Now, knowing that this would be a mixed audience of students, faculty, some architects and some landscape architects, the question was where to aim this lecture. So it may be kind of mixed. In the midst of all that, it might be aimed a little bit more toward the students and faculty for the fact that I taught probably as long or longer than I've actually practiced. So just a little forewarning. Another thing I would say is that at the outset, that in honor of Chopin's 200th birthday, this will be presented in sonata form. The first part will be kind of an overview, set the theme, be a little frenetic, then there'll be a little bit of an adagio, and then the final movement. And in those various movements, I'll be covering, in particular, toward the end, Flight 93 and Citygarden, for those who may have come to hear about that. And of course, Flight 93 has taken forever, so that's the adagio, and Citygarden took 2 years to do, so that's the faster-paced one. There's no way to get the lights down here, I suppose. Anyway, the thought was to show you what we think design might be about in our 30-person firm, And a way of doing that was to just list a series of thoughts that we think design could be. And this comes directly from a presentation we gave, an interview really, to get a project. We did get that project. I don't know if it had to do with this list of words or ideas, but really it does explain, among many, many things that we are about, that we are trying to create compelling frameworks and tell a story and embrace lightness and make things biological, which may be another way of saying, in our own terms, making them sustainable. I'm going to do this a little bit chronologically and talk about the fact that one of the early claims to fame was working on this speculative project called the Citygarden in 1985. And I'm showing that only because, and maybe this is more from a student perspective, early ideas and thoughts one might have can actually stay with you and resonate. And I was fascinated while I was young and teaching, traveling a fair amount, reading a fair amount, and certainly beginning to think about practice. I was fascinated with archetypes, which are represented in that diagram on the left, from mount to parterre or foursquare to grove to theater, and to see how those might be applied to different projects. So I put that up only because you may see remnants of that in some of the work. This is a close-up of that Citygarden, and another fascination at the time, which I haven't carried out as much, but you might see occasional vestige of, is this idea of the blue crab. I'm a great proponent of and feel immersed in the Chesapeake Bay. My father was from the Eastern Shore. So there's something about those tidal waters and those tidal creatures that literally and figuratively creeps into our projects from time to time. Very much, though, we are believers in place, and that every project you do must resonate with the particulars of a region and a place. And someone who comes from the Washington, D.C. area, now practicing out of the Piedmont, but working all over the world, we're fascinated with the dynamism of process, of landscape processes, which may be geological or may be climatic or may be momentary, and trying to draw on these almost conditions, archetypal conditions in the landscape, and apply them in some symbolic or abstract form in the designs we do. For example, one of the first residential gardens, very small, urban garden, only like 85 feet long and 25 feet wide, a courtyard in Charleston, South Carolina, we did in collaboration with W.G. Clark, at the time, Clark and Menifee, Charlie Menifee as well. And here we abstracted the tidal meanders of the South Carolina marshes into this custom concrete fountain that then conveyed itself in a recirculating way into this rill, which again was like an abstract creek, and then ended up in a very shallow reflecting pool. Later, working with William McDonough and folks like Russ Perry, who's now a principal at Smith Group, we worked on a number of different projects of different scales, from Nike's headquarters to a couple residential projects, this one in Tidewater, Virginia, where we had an opportunity to engage the landscape and engage the architecture and the client right from the start. And it was always been a great collaboration between our firm and McDonough's firm back in its glory days. Oh, excuse me. This is about 10 years ago. And part of that is working from the start diagrammatically, trying to understand how building and landscape should respond to one another and respond to, in this case, the two ridges of land and a tidal cove in between. Yes, that is a kind of a latent crab down there in the far left, but the idea was that there was an embracing quality to the site around this cove, an embracing quality to the architecture, and an embracing quality to the developed landscape. And I won't belabor this particular project. This is a freshwater pond we created looking back toward the house. The house was split in the middle, so the landscape kind of came through and echoed that bifurcation that occurred. Probably the most unusual project from a residential point of view, in the sense that we actually embedded a lap pool, which you see on the right, within that freshwater pond. This is also looking back to the house from the cove, making a point that at this time, again 10, 12 years ago, we were really earnestly pursuing sustainable strategies. They weren't only about using rainwater and green roofs, both of which this house has, but about converting grass into meadow. That we continue to do that on all sorts of scales. It is sometimes a struggle, but it seems like the right thing to do to kind of reduce the amount of maintained and chemically treated lawn. Now you'll notice too that water is a theme in much of what we do, not all of what we do, but certainly water is central to projects large and small within our practice. I guess I particularly like the quote from Lauren Isley, who says, if there is magic on this planet, it is contained in water, and we certainly believe that. So we are constantly trying to find ways to really engage existing water on site as well as invent appropriate reinterpretations of water through the site. As mentioned earlier, this is a 500-acre settlement adjacent to Seaside, which you see just on the left of that slide, on the Gulf Coast. We're working with Cooper Robertson, architects and urban designers out of New York on this master plan, which was the first project of this scale, again, that started over 10 years ago, 12 years ago now, where we had an opportunity to work at the master planning level on so large a property, right down to the specific detailing of individual parks, trails, and gardens. What was fascinating about this project was it was ultimately for a developer, Arvida and St. Joe's, one of the largest landowners in Florida. And the typical development up to that time, that sort of second home development, even though we're trying to make it a town, and there are some people who live there year-round now, was the typical development sort of trafficked in palm trees and oleanders and non-native plants. And we really made a point of that this could be expressive of its local plant communities and how water and topography, minimal amounts of topography, really did change the plant communities. And as an example, on the lower part of that slide, you see longleaf and slash pines on flat, somewhat wet areas, wonderfully expressive in its distinct horizontality, and just a little bit of elevation in this sandy climate, sandy soil climate, and you get this very expressive dry sand live oak community, sand live oak, sand live pines. So the contrast there between the distinct verticality and the meander and irregularity and sinuosity of those trees we thought was quite striking. We wanted to reinforce that or celebrate it. We also worked closely, not just with the architects, but the civil engineers in creating a more sustainable stormwater plan and making the most of the lakes and ponds there so that they weren't just off to the side, but were engaged in terms of their design and the trail system that kind of worked their way through it. And in some places that was made to look somewhat naturalistic. Other places it was very, very, very deliberately and intentionally designed. We created rooms that were rain gardens that collected water when it poured, but drained very quickly, so it could be used most of the year by families and kids. And like we did with a slightly sunken garden as a court to about 12 houses that surrounded it. We also made a point where there were particularly sensitive wetlands areas. We literally wound this boardwalk through. We could keep it low and didn't need railings. And in this instance, very deliberately over-expressed the sinuosity of this rather than just a few simple curves. We really wanted it to really express the indirectness of that route and the edge between a forest and a wetland. And then look at that in contrast to the central park of watercolor, their village green, which is called Cerulean Park, which we think was one of our major early accomplishments or victories because this is a more or less new urbanist community, and both the architects and the developers wanted this 3-acre village green to be cleared with just lawn and trees lining it. And we looked at the site and realized that it had much more potential because of what was existing on the site, the existing trees, and argued for some preservation of it, but also a kind of asymmetric engagement of the site, introducing water, both treated or recirculated water and stormwater. And it now has become an icon for not just watercolor, but really for the area as a gathering place. And it is a canal garden reflective of the agricultural traditions you find in that area, reflective of the abstracting the tannic creeks you find but also maybe alluding to Moorish gardens because we felt this kind of climate was more like you find in the Mediterranean basin. It is a place that does attract wildlife of all sorts, from butterflies on the monarch pathway to egrets and herons, and there are fish in that pond, or were fish in that pond, until the egrets showed up, or herons showed up. And then we make a point that you have to create a place, a civic green, a central park, that because it's for people, it's for great gatherings, but it should also stand alone as a kind of beautiful place to contemplate and to walk through and engage privately or individually. And we think it operates on both those bases. And you have to kind of look at both these, well, this image in particular, and imagine the difference between that articulation of a central green or park versus one that would have just been a cleared lawn and trees on the side. We are, I won't go into depth about these, we are working on a number of different development projects of various scales, including some current work with McDonough and Partners in the Netherlands. This is called Park 2020 or Buchenhorst. This one did just win an analysis and planning award from ASLA jointly with McDonough. That work is sort of built on earlier work we did with McDonough and Russ Perry at Nike's European headquarters outside of Amsterdam near Hilversum. One of the earliest projects that we did, but also I think even in Europe in the amount of water that was collected and reused and recycled, and very much a case where we tried to create landscapes and gardens and courtyards that engaged not just sustainable strategies of water reuse and native plants, but tried to engage the recreational aspects of Nike by putting in running trails and various recreation courts. Closer to home, or closer to DC, where a project that's just about completed is the North Bethesda Market, working initially with Tortigalis and currently with HKS and the developer JBG on Rockville Pike across from White Flint Mall. This is clearly a mixed-use project which has condominiums and apartments as well as a Whole Foods and a series of courts and gardens, mostly built on structure. We are working with the artist Jim Sanborn, who's doing a wonderfully interpretive piece about explorers over the kind of history of the United States, but even prior to that. As mentioned, our only real currently built work in Washington, D.C. is the Asia Trail, which is a 5-year-long project working with Leon Chatelain Architects. This is a 1.5 mile long meandering trail that takes into account 7 different Southeast Asian habitats, most particularly the great panda habitat, as well as the red panda and sloth bear. But it's a sustainably driven project as well. In fact, the trail houses a lot of the program and some stormwater controls for the site itself. And this is another view from the walkway into the sloth bear. We really worked hard here to make environments that were natural for the animals, but to at least try to acknowledge some contemporaneous and modernity in the architecture of the detailing the rails and some of the enclosures. We didn't want everything to be too faux, which it can sometimes be in a kind of zoo or animal habitat. And part of that was to also create this incredible gabion wall, which we've been trying to get green to grow there, and they've struggled with that. We've also used misters and a variety of water elements for both the animals, but also to engage humans in a kind of similar kind of environment. The projects that I'll dwell a little bit more on now are University of Virginia projects, the Dell and Campbell Hall, and Flight 93 and Citygarden. So these are 2 sites. We've had, I guess you could say, a wonderful opportunity to work in multiple places, in multiple ways on the University of Virginia campus. There's obvious reasons we're there physically. What is remarkable about the University of Virginia campus is that they undertook about 15 years ago a larger scale stormwater master plan, a very innovative one, which essentially set the framework for the projects we ultimately did. And the 2 projects, again, the Campbell Hall I'll show first at the upper right, and the Dell in the lower left. Campbell Hall was a long process of creating two architectural additions to the School of Architecture, and then creating a kind of continuous and connected series of outdoor rooms or landscapes concomitant with those two particular works of architecture. The upper left slide shows what's called the East Pavilion. That was designed by W.G. Clark. The middle one shows the South faculty offices and classrooms, which was designed by William Sherman. And again, we did all the connected landscape. And the remarkable thing about this project, beyond perhaps the work itself, was that the dean at that time, Karen Van Leggen, was able to get her faculty to work on this project. I'm not saying it was hard to get the faculty to work. It was hard to get the state to agree to have the faculty do actual built projects. They were able to do that because we worked through a firm in Richmond, SMBW. They were officially the contracting architects, but there was a lot of latitude on the part of us three faculty member designers working on this. For us, it was a very challenging project because topographically there was a lot of level change and variation, and it was also kind of a narrow band, as you can see on the right-hand slide, a narrow band of landscape that we were engaged with or had charge over. So in particular, what we tried to do is create a series of outdoor rooms that had different purposes relative to the School of Architecture. What you're seeing here is a view of the third floor studio court, and that is meant to be a work court for the students to come out, which will ultimately be shaded by the horn beams that you see there. But it's always been a kind of neglected space, and we wanted to give it an essential framework, knowing that it still is going to be heavily used, if not abused, and so it's essentially gravel as a base with a little bit of concrete as a kind of patterning within that court. But it is immediately adjacent to the third floor. We have an upper fourth floor terrace, which I'm not showing. This is the second floor terrace, which is an outdoor classroom, which hovers in part beneath the third floor, the south addition that William Sherman did. And we kind of somehow fit a usable space within that, even though it has very high retaining walls that you see to the right. But there's something about the way that south and west facing light comes through this filigree of red maples that we created, you can barely see in the slide, that actually makes it a very humane and occupiable space with chalkboards on the outside, and it actually has a little ledge of native soapstone on the concrete retaining wall that is meant for models to be pinned up or put up. And then the lowest part of that particular project is the one that most obviously deals with stormwater, and this is called the bioswale or bioretention area. And you're seeing an image or a diagram on the right that's trying to show in various blues all the different waters that we took from the site, from the roof, from the drive, from the parking area, and from some of the other paved surfaces that we actually were able to direct into our project and daylight the water up to a point, because that had to ultimately go back into existing pipes, so that it would actually slow the water down, allow it to infiltrate somewhat, but also celebrate this whole collection and conveyance of stormwater. And so you're seeing a view on the left of, if you go beyond that outdoor classroom, you walk down this stone gabion wall on the left side that allows water to come through off of the road, and then a series of simple concrete weirs and a native plantation that allows the water to collect. This is just a detail of one of those scuppers or weirs, and the point here is simply it's an ephemeral condition, and when it rains, the water pools up, and if it rains heavily enough, I think I have a slide, you'll actually see it gush through there, but for the most part, it just holds it back and lets it percolate in. So most of the time that you would go here, you wouldn't see much water, but if it's raining, it's quite expressive. This was it under construction. You can see the relationship back to the south addition and the outdoor classroom I showed you earlier on. Gabions to the right, the set of weir walls, the pipes leading in, being conveyed into this series of collection basins. This was it, and shortly after it was actually completed and planted during a rainstorm. It's a little dark slide. It's always tough in a rainstorm to take a bright slide. But in any event, you can see that it actually does function as designed, and we can't take complete credit for its functioning effectively because obviously, again, we had to work with good civil engineers to calculate the proper quantities of water that would be conveyed in particular 1, 2, 10, and 100-year storms. Then this, I like this set of slides because this one was literally within weeks of when it was completed. This is like 6 months later, and then this is 8 months later. And I think it's, to me, this is part of the charm, the magic of landscape architecture is it changes, it can be ephemeral, it comes and goes, and we really, I think, celebrated that. And just so you know what the plants are here, for those who are interested, this is sensitive fern, little blue stem, itea, blue-eyed grass, and cardinal flower. And at this point in the midsummer or late spring, early summer, you don't see much of the cardinal flower. You see the sensitive fern, and the grasses are just coming up. But by the end of the summer, it's all about the cardinal flower and the grasses. So again, there's this great kind of ebb and flow of just the plant life there. You guys who are architects are more interested in marveling at the addition, but I'm going to continue to emphasize the landscape. There is a rapport between the two here, but this is about the landscape. The dell was, for us, an absolute unique project because we had an opportunity in this 10-acre site to daylight a stream, and in the process of daylighting the stream, which means taking it out of pipes, also conveying that into a stormwater collection pond. And here the challenge by collaboration is to make the thing work functionally from a water quality and quantity point of view, but also to make it a kind of beautiful part of the university, which literally is a seam between the university and a neighborhood, but is also one of the entrances to the university because of a parking garage at Newcomb Hall. So this is the view of the completed project from the air. One thing to point out from the start is there are really two orders at work here. You could say two geometries, two orders. One is the straight line or geometric order that is directly derivative of the lawn or Jefferson's grid. That very strong line you see in the center of that slide is literally perpendicular to the lawn, which is about a quarter mile away. And then that's juxtaposed to the meander of the stream, which you see vestigially on the upper left part of the slide, emptying into the ponds, but then we use that same meander to shape the topography on the right side of the ponds and lake, so that there would be the sense that there's both a human order and a natural order at play here. This is just a diagram of the before conditions. It was completely underground stream in pipes that had been done back in the 50s and 60s, a couple recreational courts that we had to work around, tennis courts and basketball courts, and parking. One of our strategies in bringing the stream back to life, bringing it into this stormwater pond, was to suggest that maybe we could create this as what I called an eco-botanic garden. I still was teaching plants at the time. And so what we did was we made the lower portion around the pond reflective of native tidewater Virginia plants, the middle portion native Piedmont plants, and the upper part native upland or mountain or Blue Ridge plants. And part of that was just to let the students see the difference between a magnolia, like a Magnolia virginiana that grew naturally in the coastal plain, versus some of the upland magnolias, umbrella magnolias that you would find up in the mountains. But part of this project was as much about cultural history. That wasn't just about natural history, but cultural history. This site was neglected and abandoned, but there were the remnants of an old garden and garden follies here, and I've circled that in red. It's all overgrown, but we were able to resurrect that part of the project. And this is as it was built, so that garden folly became a kind of central part of the scheme in its kind of position relative to the pond and the forebay. The stream then, brought out of the pipes, comes through this weir wall of stone, and we were very deliberate about saying, okay, we can work with the hydrology of recreating this stream up to a point, but then we wanted to make it obvious that there was human intention, human endeavor here. So the stream gets transformed from something wilder to something much more disciplined. as it conveys through this stone channel under this wood bridge and then into the pond itself. And you're seeing in this view the stream at a higher, like a 2-year storm level, and it can gush even more than that. Then you're seeing it fall into the upper pond, which is called the forebay, and it's designed so that you could actually clean that out earlier than you have to clean out the larger pond, because it'll sediment, the sediments will gather in it more readily. And it's roughly on a 5-year cycle of kind of cleanouts for that. But we also designed the weir wall between the forebay and the lower pond so that it would portray the different dynamics of different storm levels. So you see that there's two indentations. The central indentation is normal flow. A wider indentation is, what you're seeing in action here, is a 2-year storm, and beyond that would be 5 or 10-year storm. So we literally wanted to articulate or express the distinctions between different storm levels. And here you can see at a kind of normal flow level where the entire stone weir wall is above the water level, can actually be walked on, and they have a little sign that says, please do not, and of course everybody does. It's a pretty engaging sort of place. And not unlike what I mentioned at watercolor, perhaps one of the greatest contributions that Dell has made, besides being a wonderful transition between neighborhood and university as a park, is it has brought wildlife back into this part of town and the university, both in the wildlife, that is to say fauna, and been very expressive of native plants. And then of course particular native plants like these marshmallows draw very particular kinds of wildlife to them as well in terms of pollinators, et cetera. And just a couple of the views looking back and kind of concluding with Adele that part of the intention, certainly as a very water and plant expressive place, is that it be cognizant of these wonderful seasonal variations that we have in the Mid-Atlantic in Charlottesville and Washington, D.C. So this is a kind of fall view. This is a summer view again, and then a winter view. We don't get a whole lot of snow. Well, we did this year in Charlottesville, but it's pretty dramatic when it does snow, and it stays active. And I think one of the great things about this project is you do have a live and active stream that is constantly flowing and feeding this, though it does, again, ebb and flow with the seasons and with storms. Okay, Flight 93 then. This is the only project I guess I'm showing that is not yet built, though it is in the process. And I won't do complete justice to this process, but I want to, it obviously is a tremendous honor to be involved with this project, this design, with the families, with the National Park Service, and to try to explain, how it came that we worked on this project. And I want you to keep in mind that quote, a common field, one day a field of honor forever, because I think that's the premise of this project from start to finish. What's important is to realize this was an international competition, one board competition. Students should perk up on that one, just one board. We didn't even enter it. 1,000 people entered it, as I said, and they picked 5 finalists. This was one of the 5 finalists, scheme submitted by Paul Murdoch, an architect out of Los Angeles. And at the time they picked the 5 finalists, the jury suggested that each of those 5 finalists now form a more full and complete team to go the second round. The second round, we were all paid something. But we weren't involved again in that first round. And what happened was that Paul Murdoch gave us a call. We didn't know them, but they had done some research and knew that we worked on large sites. We were based in the Mid-Atlantic. So he invited us to join their team, and we did. We did, in fact, look at the other 4 schemes, and all of them intriguing, but we thought of all the 5 schemes, this is the one that we most readily could imagine ourselves being a part of. But I'm showing you the original competition board on the left and the site on the right, just so you can understand the distinction between that first round before we were involved and the second round and our relative contributions. We have, from the beginning to the end, honored the design intent, which was this arc of trees that would define this common field and ultimately field of honor that would then lead you to the sacred ground. But originally that arc of trees was up at the ridge, and it was only a single row of trees. And when we all went to the site, and the architects in this case, and many of the competitors had not been to the site, it wasn't very available during the initial competition, but once they had the 5 finalists picked out and the teams were reformed, then we all got to go to the site. And when we realized the immense scale of that site and the kind of severe climatic conditions, we realized that that single line of trees on the ridge was just not going to work. It was just too extreme. That's Paul Murdoch explaining a later scheme that we all developed collectively and in collaboration on the site. I would point out where it is in case people don't know. In southwestern Pennsylvania, in the Laurel Highlands, a cold zone, zone 5, high elevation, well over 2,500 feet. So it's a challenging site, and as you'll see, even more challenging by the fact that it was a strip mine site before the plane crashed and before it became a memorial. And you can also see on that slide, maybe get a sense of this plane, imagining now flying from Newark, New Jersey, headed toward Cleveland before it turned around, and as everyone knows, likely headed toward either the Capitol or the White House. And of course, the heroic efforts of the 40 passengers caused it to crash in this field in Pennsylvania. So how do you respond? How do you honor that? So, but to keep in mind that this is what the site looked like, only 10, 20 years ago. It was a almost completely strip mine site, coal mine. So it was an already transformed site, and I think because of this, and this, by the way, was what the site looked like when we engaged it 5 years ago, we kind of regarded, I say we collectively as a team, and in particular as landscape architects, we regarded the entire project as a healing landscape. Certainly the memorial site, and all about honoring the passengers who helped crash that plane, that was about healing relative to them and honoring them. But we also had 2,000 other acres to engage, and we saw that as a major effort in terms of healing a once scarred and strip mined landscape. If you have been in the last 5 years to the site, they've had a series of temporary memorials that are moving in and of themselves with the flapping of the flags and the mementos attached to these chain link fences. It really, to go there under almost any circumstance is to be moved. So I'm going to just take you quickly through, relying mostly on the competition boards. There have been some adjustments since then, but the sequence that was intended, because it's such a vast landscape that the Park Service has and the families have acquired, 2,200 acres, there's going to be a 2-mile entrance road that comes off of Pennsylvania Route 30. The first thing you will engage is a series of bands of native white pines capped by a tower of voices that will have 40 chimes in it, one representing each member who lost their life. This just giving you an idea of the scale of that site, and that we're actually entering from the very top, that road at the very top, winding all the way through to the crash site or the honorific site, which is that great circle you see of trees and groves toward the middle left side of the site. And just to compare, the stage 1 competition, before we were involved, that was the original scheme. After we involved stage 2, helping to flesh out the scheme. And part of it was simply coming to grips with the magnitude of that scale and scaling it down. Even so, it's an enormous circle, an enormous bowl, an enormous field that we're embracing that leads up to the sacred ground, which is that slightly jagged line you see opposite the red circle arc. Another one of our contributions was to acknowledge, as we always do, seasonality, but in this case, trying to make clear that the season, how you plant for the seasons or acknowledge the seasons, in this case, might be geared more toward the times people would visit this, i.e. they would visit Memorial Day, Independence Day, certainly September 11th would be the really big day, and Veterans Day. So rather than just saying spring, summer, fall, winter, more about these particular times that the largest group of people would be there. So, our charge from the start of that competition to this day has been to comprehend and work with the scale of this landscape, but to get to know it so that we understand it as a transformed landscape from mining, but that there is an existing plant palette, both successional and later evolution plant communities. And so, as we would do on any project, we spend time on the site trying to create a plant palette that comes from that site. That doesn't come from somewhere else, it comes from that site. And in this case, because we knew we were going to be dealing with a lot of meadow field areas, making up a note of what really did tend to blossom, and particularly right around September 11th, goldenrod and aster in particular you're seeing on the left-hand side. This is two members of the office, Todd Schallenberger, who was the senior project manager on the project, and Paul Josie, spending time on the site to explicate or understand what's there. This is the entry drive. This is just a few views and perspectives to remind you of what the sequence will be like, again, entering and transforming what's an existing haul road that will, with some manipulation, become the actual Parkway Drive. It will arrive at the visitor center, which is marking the flight path, and the height of those walls are the speculation of just how high that plane was as it came over this part of the site. So there's a continual or episodic marking of the flight path as the most honorific kind of place before you get to the sacred ground. I think this diagram best explains the elements, the primary elements of the memorial proper beyond the Tower of Voices. The idea that you arrive where it says Arrival and Visitor Center, and the dashed red line is the marking of the flight path down to the sacred ground, which is where the plane actually crashed. To give you a sense of scale, the sacred ground area, lower left, that's 80 acres. Field of Honor is close to 200 acres. So the actual circle of trees that goes from the visitor center down to the sacred ground is almost a mile-long walk. There is a drive. You can drive to the lower parking lot, or you can walk from the upper parking lot and arrival point, either along the allée or you can meander on the other side, the left side. So there's some choices made. As far as the constructs of the landscape, obviously we're embracing this field of honor and it's being reinforced by this allée of trees and 40 groves, again, one grove to represent each person who lost their lives, and a kind of reforestation portion behind that to really thicken it up and protect it. And just a few glimpses from the competition boards of this great arc and circle of red maple trees, backed by a more diverse set of 7 different species in the groves. And this looks over the field of honor to the sacred ground beyond. This is coming down on the flight path to the sacred ground, which is beyond that wall. And the 40 names are inscribed in that little white, almost translucent panel of marble on the right side. This is the site under construction. This was taken about 3 weeks ago. Again, the magnitude of this is it's almost too much to take in one view. This is, by the way, this is being done in phases. It's I think $32 million altogether for the first couple of phases. This is a $16 million phase one, which went under construction earlier this year and is meant to be completed. Phase one meant to be completed on the September 11th 10-year anniversary next year. Here you're seeing the foundations for the site wall for the sacred ground. That is to say, the mediation between where the public can come to and what's private ground. Because essentially that sacred ground is a cemetery. And so only the family members are allowed actual access into it on those special occasions. So the public is held back and obviously can leave and will leave mementos to continue to do that. This is a view from above, roughly not quite where the visitor center would be, the marking of the flight path down to that sacred ground, which is that lighter green area beyond, and hemlocks backing that up. And here you see it marked in a more recent rendering with the wall and the black granite path down to the field beyond. And then just a couple shots of under construction, the grading of the great circle or arc, and then what that will look like as you walk along it and take a position overlooking that field. And in the far background, you can see the visitor center. And the last few shots, I think these are kind of interesting in telling that this was while it was being strip mined, and just a sense of excavation and mining the land, enormous scale. And this was taken just recently, where we're actually trying to save the topsoil and screen the topsoil, and different portrayals of different times and different purposes of the use of that land. And then finally, what we hope will, in some ways, this is as it is right now, and we think from a lot of vantage points, this is the way it will be. It's meant to be a kind of reflective, contemplative, and always poignant place to be. The last project to talk about is Citygarden, which is a 3-acre, 2-block sculpture garden in downtown St. Louis. That's a before and after, and you see it in relationship to Saarinen Arch. It's about 5 blocks up from the arch and the river, along what's called the Gateway Mall. You get some sense from the slide on the left that it was the site we were given was a pretty vacant, unarticulated site, just lawn and a few trees on the edge. It was thoroughly underused, used only primarily by smokers during lunch who came out of the various office buildings on either side. This is in green, the 2 blocks within what's a 15-block mall area that dates back to kind of a Beaux-Arts plan for St. Louis. And other than a couple interruptions, it's still open, but it is not very beautifully designed in most parts, and I think St. Louis is making a concerted effort to change that. And that's all part of a revitalization of downtown that's very hopeful in terms of people moving back downtown. St. Louis was a classic Midwestern city that vacated at 5 o'clock other than baseball games. And they are, by fits and starts, I think, attracting people back downtown as they redevelop lofts. And I think this effort was to be a part of that. But I want to make very clear that this project, keeping it there for a minute, or I'll keep it here actually, if I can get back to that. This project was sponsored by a private foundation, the Gateway Foundation, who proved to be terrific clients. It was done in collaboration with the Parks Department of the City of St. Louis and the city itself, but the city really only provided the land. The foundation provided the design fees, the construction, the cost of construction, all the sculptures, and the ongoing security and maintenance. Remarkable. And just to get it right out in front, we didn't know what the budget was for this. It ended up being $25 million plus or minus. No one will give us an exact figure. But I'll never forget, we worked our way into schematics, and we would say, what's the budget? We kind of need a budget going forward. And the head of the Gateway Foundation looked at me and said, we're not going to give you a budget. We just want your best ideas. Well, as a designer, that's almost beyond ideal. Well, let me talk about influences. That is our design influences, a little bit about the process and what kind of affected the way we thought about this design. And it had much to do with the presence of St. Louis at the confluence of the Missouri and Mississippi River, and quite taken by these great arcs and bends in the river, the limestone bluffs, and the pattern of agriculture that kind of came up to these kind of natural corridors and sometimes managed corridors. And of course, we would see something like this every time we flew in and out of St. Louis. This is actually not taken right around St. Louis, but the same idea that this incredible hydrologic history, or geologic history, of the movement of those rivers as they created various meanders and oxbows. So there was a kind of pattern and character and process to this larger region that we felt we wanted to bring in some manner into this small 3-acre, 2-block site. Here's an example of those great limestone bluffs above the Mississippi River with water occasionally seeping and cascading from uplands to the lowlands. So the site was just 2 acres. It was, as we said, away from the river, though you could see the arch. It looked like a blank canvas, but we spent a little time studying it to find clues that were more immediate than just the great rivers. And one of those, I don't know how well you can read these images, I have 2. We sort of dug back and looked at as it ended up, a 1916 Sanborn map, and we realized these were blocks that were at one point prior to this great Beaux-Arts plan and prior to some urban renewal. These were blocks that were built on and had a series of low and medium rise buildings, mix of mostly commercial buildings in this spot, occasional residential. But there were literally property lines, foundations, and alleyways that we thought, well, maybe we could recall them. Even though they were not literally marked on the site currently, we thought, why not kind of bring that back? If you look just at the alleys, as an example, what's interesting here is the block on the west side, the left side, the alley is where you expect it, sort of dead center. But the alley on the right side has a kind of idiosyncratic crank to it. And we decided, well, why not? Let's literally kind of recall those 2 alleys in their kind of curious idiosyncratic state on the right and its normative state on the left. And the patterns, I should say, go back, the patterns that you see here for the garden became the structure for the patterns that came out of the property lines, and the foundations became the pattern for the garden structure on the south side. Some of the first instincts were to look at these 2 blocks as somehow conjoined, even though we were not given the center street as a pedestrian street originally. It was meant to stay open. But we still wanted to link the two blocks. So the thought was to essentially create a tripartite composition whereby the northern band we call the kind of uplands, the center band, the floodplain, and the lower band, the Market Street Gardens, all in relationship to immediate context, all in relationship to how the sun and light moved, but also in acknowledgement of a multitude of sculptures that we had to incorporate into the project. This is another way of expressing that tripartite composition of the urban forest on one side, central green or floodplain in the middle, and the Market Street Gardens. This is the plan as finally designed, and hopefully you can see the various components, which included, ultimately, didn't happen initially, but what got incorporated partway through schematics into DD, was a cafe, over 2,000 square foot cafe that Phil Durham from St. Louis designed in collaboration with us, and then this maintenance building. The cafe is in the far upper right, and the maintenance building is tucked into the mid block on the north side, on the left side. And one other thing to mention about the diagram, the scheme, is even though it was not a part of our charge from the client, or even really from the city was just happy to get anything here, we felt this project ought to be a demonstration garden for sustainable practices. And what these diagrams on the top are showing is all the areas that we were collecting stormwater, whether that was site water or street water, the part we could control. And then in other cases, green roofs or structural soils or other means for preserving the integrity of the trees we were going to bring in. As not an aside, but a critical part of the process, early on, we did some diagramming of other sculpture gardens, other urban spaces. These just happen to be ones from New York, the Museum of Modern Art on the left, various versions of Bryant Park and its green on the right, with the superimposition of our 2 blocks in the green on the right side. And the point is just to understand the scale of what we are working with relative to other urban parks, and in particular urban sculpture gardens, and we looked at a lot more than just these 2. We looked at quite a few. Now the sculptures themselves, we were told from the beginning that there would be 18 to 24 sculptures, but we were given ultimately this kind of panel board, and it really wasn't until we were, I don't know, a third into the project that we actually got to see some of these sculptures which they had housed in warehouses, but they didn't have them all at the time we started. And they even asked our opinions about what we could or could not, should add to this. And so it actually grew from the say 18 they had either in hand or going, already commissioned to buy, to 24. I think at some point we collectively said that's enough, if not too much, because 24 site-scale sculptures on a 2-block site is a lot of sculptures. But I think we have effectively positioned them, which was clearly part of the challenge as well as part of the fun of this particular project. And it includes some pretty prominent pieces, not all of which I'll show, like a Leger and a Mayol, de Souvero, Tom Ottering, I forget his last name. As part of the study, though, and a part of working with the Gateway Foundation and the client, we did these models where we actually could physically move. This is obviously more at the DD stage. We could literally move these scale models around and just debate what the best locations were for them. It was a wonderfully synthetic and collaborative process. So this is the result, and I hope you can see from this aerial view the distinctions between the right side and the left side and the center. And to denote those three, this tripartite composition, we deliberately used inscribed this enormous arc wall using native limestone that was quarried just 30 miles down the Mississippi River from our site. A kind of massive limestone wall that varied from 4 feet in height to, in some places, as much as 10 feet in height where we were tying it into the maintenance building. But we punctured it and penetrated it as often as we could just to allow for some transparency and because of obvious security controls. But what it allowed us to do was to actually create a little elevation. And even though it looked like 2 flat blocks, we did find that the far northeast corner was 6 feet higher than the lowest point on the site. So what we decided, we would work with that elevational difference and exaggerate it some. So the arc wall provides an opportunity to lift elevation on the urban garden side, on the cafe side, as a kind of plinth or terrace overlooking the garden. Allowed us to kind of almost excavate out the floodplain to make it as flat and low as we could, and then just very subtly lift the Market Street gardens so that they're maybe only 18 inches up and marked by a kind of meander seat wall, which is capped with a Minnesota green-gray granite. So just a sequence of what the site looked like when we started. This is beautiful civil courts building at the far end, and more nondescript corporate buildings on either side, which happen to be AT&T on one side and Bank of America. No small corporations here overlooking the site. They were supporters of what we did, and certainly more finished Photoshops like this one that we were presented to various boards and approval agencies as this project moved forward. So that's the last rendering we did. This is it as it was built during the day. This is one of the primary entrances from the east side. This is it at night. Worked with Fisher Morant Stone as lighting consultants and Randy Burkett out of St. Louis. Fisher Morant Stone is out of New York City. So we had a number of lighting consultants on this. And then I thought I'd just talk about those different parts a little bit more. That first sequence was really about the center or the floodplain. I should have made a point, which you might see back, if I go all the way back to the aerial view, you probably notice, you can see it there, but the aerial probably shows it best. Where are we there? That the center floodplain area has the largest trees, and we had 32 trees that varied from low end was 6-inch caliper, and I think the high end was 16-inch caliper. That's a pretty big tree to move. And we had a great company, Environmental Design, that did move those trees for us. Most of them came from the surrounding region. A few we had to reach as far as Halka in New Jersey just to get the scale we wanted. But I'm making the point that the centerpiece, the center floodplain area has the largest trees because we're trying to create there a more park-like setting with lots of shade, but also choosing large trees to complement our location for very large sculptures. So the biggest sculptures on the site happen to be in coordination or collaboration with the largest living sculptures, which are those trees. So again, the sequence taking you to the night. Then this is now Chestnut Street, just trying to show you the urban edge and a very deliberate attempt to make this project as fully accessible as possible, to blur the distinctions, Stramp-like. Arthur Erickson, I think, pioneered this, where steps and ramps are they're not even really ramps because these are less than 5%. And we're deliberate about trying to keep railings out of this. And I think the splendor of Citygarden, which I don't know, we shouldn't get too much credit for, the Gateway Foundation should get most of the credit, is we talked about it being accessible in every dimension or every way. And by that we don't mean just from the point of view of disabled people. We meant that everyone could engage virtually all aspects of this park all the time that it was open, which is almost 24 hours. And what that most explicitly meant was that they could engage the water, they could go in the water, and this, the most remarkable of all, is that they could engage the sculptures. In other words, there's touching of the sculptures. There are no signs that say, do not touch. I don't know if the sculptors like that idea, but the Gateway Foundation, which bought those sculptures, was committed to drawing the widest public into this place and space. So this is the cafe, which we deliberately wanted as a transparent pavilion into the park, and it sort of hovers at that upper terrace overlooking an 80-foot-long panel of water that cascades down 6 feet. Then as you go farther up, further to the west along that limestone arc wall, it breaks down at a certain point to become a kind of like an outcrop, and at the head of that outcrop, we embedded a video wall that shows video art on a kind of looping basis that's changed out every month and is curated by one of the St. Louis art museums. Then on the Market Street side, which is the south side, we were working within a larger master plan idea that suggested that while every one of these 15 blocks could be different, that there should be some relatively common denominator for those 15 blocks, and they suggested it might be a promenade. So we were the first to design within the context of an emerging master plan. And so along Market Street, which is the busier and wider street, we did this very wide public pedestrian walk lined by male ginkgo trees, gesturing obviously toward the arch and toward the river. But notice too that what distinguishes this from a typical urban LA is the folding in of these gardens. And we had the great privilege, really, of working with the Missouri Botanic Garden from the start and working with their horticulturalists to make decisions about the right plant choices for not just Missouri and St. Louis, but tougher urban conditions. So there, in the end, we probably worked with about 80% native plants and 20% non-native but acclimated non-invasive plants. And you get a hint here, the boxwoods were used as part of the structure that reflected those old property lines and foundations and became the compartmentalizers for the various garden beds. We also very deliberately shied away from the overused non-native ground covers like liriope and vinca and ivy, striving to use some new natives that haven't been used so much in these kind of settings like heuchera, which is coral bell, and Pennsylvania sedge, among others. There are 3 kinds of water in the park. Actually, you could say more than that, but 3 primary water moments or elements. This is at the southeast entrance at Eros Bendato Mittori sculpture that we put on a slightly tilted granite disc and ran a water scrim down from it, so it's engaging on lots of different levels as people come into the park. And it's quite a conversation piece. It's a hollow piece, so kids get inside. And again, totally permitted. And then this, I mentioned earlier, this 80-foot-long basin that starts at that higher elevation, and it's meant to kind of cascade and or seep across this jagged limestone edge into the lower basin. So essentially it's a 6-foot waterfall. It does provide a wonderfully reflective pool for the Mayol, which is across from the cafe, which is just to the left there. And then at the lower level, in the floodplain level, then it's a place of engagement with the kids and family. And you can walk across those stepping stones to get from one side to the other. And then so that was the second primary water element. The third, and both the first 2 were on the eastern block. This is on the western block. This is a spray jet fountain, a plaza, which might seem like a cliche, but we did 104 jets here, and it's the most central and attractive place probably in the entire project. It's got a number of different choreographed loops for the jets, which could go up to 6 to 8 feet. It also has different colored lights at night. But because we surrounded it with two kinds of walls, that meander wall on one side and these limestone block walls at the other, it's a great spectating place as well as a place of engagement. It has within it this 104 spray jet fountain. It has within it a loop or oxbow, a reflecting pool. We only intended this to be a place for that sculpture to sit, but it's become one of the most popular places for kids. And I've been there a number of times where I've watched a parent as they just let their kids literally swim laps around the sculpture. I mean, it's kind of remarkable. But we let that happen. Now, it's become so popular that, and it was not planned this way, they now post lifeguards. They post lifeguards here. But they're willing to do it because it's such an engaging and family-friendly place. Just a couple other images of aspects of the project. This is our early, well, not early, our late Photoshop imagery of the meander wall. And the part of the intent of this sinuosity is not just to use or symbolize, reflect the meanders of the adjacent rivers, but it really was an opportunity to see that gave you a diversity of spaces, little alcoves for both sculptures, smaller sculptures, and people. And we use this as an opportunity to talk about different seasons as well. Though when we presented this to some of the city parks and board members, they said, "Lovely. I'm not going there in the winter, though. Do you know how cold it gets there in winter?" So anyway, but as designers, we're at least imagining that there will be some families will occasionally come to the site in the winter. It will be open in the winter, so we choose our plants and our designs accordingly. This is as it was built, and you can see how that meander wall holds back the horticultural gardens. Another view of that same. This is an interesting story about this meander wall. Even though it seemed we had an unlimited budget, occasionally the clients would put their foot down, and this was a good case in point. We had thought that what would be the best is if this meander wall was solid granite with a kind of inclined leading edge. They thought, the foundation thought, that was a little excessive. It might be very expensive, and why not just a thick cap on a concrete base? And so we did colored concrete, did some mock-ups, and went to this. And in the end, not only is this less expensive, it might be better because what we get is a kind of hovering meander line of this green-gray granite that floats almost as if it's a frozen stream in a way that I think a solid or integral granite piece might not have. And it should be noted that this meander wall, which is 1,100 feet long, winds its way through the two blocks and deliberately winds its way in and out of the sun, in and out of the gardens, such that, particularly at lunchtime, you really see this populated by people who come to sit and talk and eat their lunch. Ultimately, though, it's a place of celebration, celebration of these in times absolutely whimsical and wonderful sculptures in relationship to the landscape and the garden. It has kind of magic moments, I think, at almost every time of day. The light that's sort of caught there in the morning right through the evening is pretty special, I believe. As I said, it's absolutely accessible, and kids have taken to virtually every sculpture in their own distinct ways. I like this particular image, emblematic, I think, because in this case you see one of the several, I think we have 6 rain gardens. This is one of the central rain gardens. And our point with rain gardens isn't just to collect and percolate water and convey water, but it's to say it could be a central part of what you do, not a kind of indistinct or separate part of what you do in a major public or urban space. And it's very much about the ephemerality of water and plants. And just a wonderful coincidence here is that these panicum, which wave in the wind, have a kind of dialogue or rapport with this Ricky, which is also a kinetic and wind-driven sculpture. But you also see that cranked alley path through the center. You see the relationship of the project to the arch and to the water coming out of the arch wall and the waterfall. At night, the spray jet fountains comes to life with a variety of different colors. We actually were allowed to choreograph sequences for this, or we thought we were doing that. I remember when we were given that charge, because the fountain mechanical designers said we could do that, they can do almost anything. In my, I don't know, ambition or hubris or something, wanted to program one based on Chopin's Raindrop Prelude. They said that was ridiculous, and so that didn't happen. But it was a nice thought at the time, in any event. And once we've experienced, we realize it almost doesn't matter how it's choreographed. Just the fact that it varies, both in terms of height and color, it's almost transformative. So this is my concluding slide, and a little story. When this opened, and I should have mentioned this, it was the most amazing project from design conception. When we were first hired to the opening day, was 28 months, which is remarkable for a civic and urban project. When you consider that we've been working on Flight 93 for 5-6 years, and that project won't be complete till 2015 in its entirety. Anyway, this project on opening night, which was July 1st of last year, 2009, Sue Nelson, my founding partner, who's also my wife, and we brought our daughter, who's now 21, to this celebration. Our daughter, like many kids, even though she has because she has two landscape architects as parents, is doing everything she can to be not a landscape architect, which is fine. I mean, it's great. She's international studies and environmental studies. But we took her to this celebration, and it really was a celebratory affair. And that's her on the right, silhouette on the right. At the very end of the evening, she turns to us and says, "Mom and Dad, this is unfair. You're making me want to be a landscape architect." So with that, I conclude, and thank you, and I'll be glad to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Warren. And as we bring the lights up, we've got a microphone. If you wouldn't mind raising your hand, we'll come around and make sure we get them recorded. How about that? Got a question?
A few of you stayed. Thank you. I couldn't tell. It's pretty dark. Questions? Yeah, there's
Here we go.
one, two.
I was wondering about the input of the families into the Flight 93 site.
Yeah, the question was about the input of the families into the Flight 93 Memorial Project. They've been involved from the start in a very integrated way, but it's always been representatives. You know, it's I guess difficult to have 40 representatives. So they supposedly elected, or there were family members chosen, to be part of various review committees and boards, which has evolved over time because it's been such a long and difficult process. And I didn't want to go into it, and I don't think I want to go into it now, but there is a project not without controversy, as every memorial project seems to be. We've worked through many of those controversies. There's new ones that just emerged that I had never heard of till just the other day. So to get 40 families to agree that you're making the Park Service is making the right decisions, the designers are making the right decisions, hugely challenging. And at this point, I would say we don't necessarily have the complete consensus one might have hoped for. It's pretty darn close, but there's always some concern about, you know, is it the right way to represent the events that happened? And you know, if you get involved in a project like this, you have to be willing to address and deal with that, and it's not easy. Yeah.
Hi, regarding the Memorial Gardens, or the St. Louis Gardens, anyway, Gateway Gardens, I guess it is. I'm very interested because here in Washington, we're in the middle of thinking about a reuse of Walter Reed's site, which is 62 and a half acres that the DC is looking to reuse. One of the concerns that we hear often in North Washington, in that area, my neck of the woods, is, well, if we put in gardens or a park, it'll be overtaken by the alcoholics. How did you face that challenge? Is that something that you had to deal with, or? I know
Well-
in Bryant Park, for example, it's huge, and you do see some folks with carts and all, but mostly it's used by people at lunchtime and just enjoying the park in Bryant Park in New York.
Yeah, I think Citygarden has benefited. You know, it may be the exception because of the great commitment of the Gateway Foundation. I guess I'd first say that the Parks Department, which ultimately runs it, has a policy of parks closing at 11 p.m. and reopening at dawn, and it probably is to somewhat control the homeless issue. It's interesting in this park because we deliberately designed it to be open. It's unlike almost any sculpture garden you can think of because it doesn't have walls. I mean, it has walls, but not walls that keep you out. They just define edges. It's meant to be open and transparent. So even though they have that policy, if somebody comes in after 11, they let them because it's safe enough and well lit enough. But the real secret to that, and it has a lot to do with scale as well as the foundation, is that they committed to 2 security people on that site all the time. And part of that commitment on their part is selfish in that they want to make sure that they protect this. They let people touch the sculptures, but they want to protect them to make no damage is done. But it's also to manage people as they use the park. And they clearly are schooled or trained in being open and embracing and allowing some latitude. But I think if someone would try to commit to sleeping overnight there, they would be shooed out. So that's their answer to that. But it is an enormous problem, and I don't think it's easily solvable if you don't have that kind of degree of management. Russ.
Staying with the Memorial Garden, the Gateway Garden, I love the embrace of the circumstantial, of the old property lines and the cranked alley and so on and so forth, which fit both within your description of whimsy and also mystery, I think. What the hell are these things? What do you know anecdotally about how the public who has not heard your explanation actually engage with those question marks?
Yeah, that's a good question, only in the sense of, do we want to interpret it? And I think you can, I don't think they've literally interpreted those things. There's website and there's narrative, and I think there are podcasts. There are a lot of ways you can get access to even the designer's intentions. I mean, this is a rare project where the designers were given a lot of opportunity to explain themselves, not just to the client, but on paper, in words. So we describe these things, and anybody can get access to it. On site, it hasn't yet been so explicitly interpreted, like there's not a sign right near the garden foundations that say that. And I don't know that we want to be that explicit. It's one of those things that works, and it's a nice story to tell. They do run a lot of interpretive programs through there, and particularly the local art museums because of the sculpture. And they also will tell some of the story of the design intent. And I've even been invited to do a few of those. Of course, I really talk those things up quite a bit, and it's always a revelation. They love hearing those stories. But yeah, it's always a question of how. For us, it was a framework. It was a means to an end, and it's a great story to tell. But is it essential that everybody knows that? Maybe not. It'd be bad though.
We have time for probably just one more question.
Iris. 2 more.
Warren, I'm glad you showed your beautiful title drawing, because what I've noticed as you went through these projects is that there's either a conscious or subconscious continuity of the formal and the natural romantic landscape that you carry through as you've brought new ideas, sustainability becoming part of your gardens. And it's very exciting to see, along with the beautiful drawings you continue to do.
Thank you. I like those kind of non-questions. There's one more right
Which
there.
means we'll take one more.
Yeah. Thank you, Iris.
I am not an architect or a landscaper, so I do not know sort of the world you live in. But I wonder, when you think about the state of public projects you see, what do you think is the biggest missed opportunity? What do you walk away thinking, gosh, I wish we could get them to blah, blah, blah?
Well, let me try to answer it this way, because I don't think there's a single thing I can point to. That's too hard to do. But when I gave a talk just about Citygarden a week ago, a question like that came up. They said, it's interesting that projects like the High Line and Citygarden are emerging, where there is a re-emphasis on horticulture and gardens and wildness and diversity. And how do you explain that? And what I said was, I felt that there is, maybe it's a rebirth, but our cities have been so impoverished in the last 20 or 30 years relative to that it's now taken private foundations to re-energize them. And so, I don't know if this fully answers your question, but I think if we could get to the point where governments or municipalities or parks departments were not so restricted that for them it's all about only maintenance and the minimal maintenance, and it could be a little more than that, a little more ennobling, and it takes an informed citizenry, but even more so the deep pockets of a foundation to make that happen. But I think, well, see, Millennium Park in Chicago, now St. Louis, and the High Line, and I think because all three of those have had a measure of great success, that I think there's going to be hopefully there's going to be a ripple effect. And whether that means, it just means more foundations and more cities devote themselves to parks, that would be great, or that parks departments and governments get re-energized and feel like they should spend more money. Either way, that's a more positive direction.
Well, we're fortunate to have professionals and designers like you leading that rebirth, and so we'd like to thank you tonight for sharing your work with us. Thank you very much, Warren.
Thanks.